Hello everyone, and I'm Autobot Sonic the Telltale Gamer, bringing listeners in Telltale Games, Transformers, and more. So with this two episodes of Cyberverse, I can happily say we are finally out of the loop arc of Transformers Cyberverse Season 3. And not saying that I hated the loop arc, I did like it in the beginning. I do think though it dragged on for a little bit, just constantly failing to get these characters out of the loop. But now that everyone is finally out of the loop with these episodes, and I guess you can say is now in the loop with what's going on, I'm really enjoying these episodes, and they were a lot better than the last two episodes with the trial and the prisoner. So I'm really happy with how these turned out, though they're not without their own problems. So for today's review, we're going to be looking at Transformers Cyberverse Season 3, Episode 11, The Scientist, and Episode 12, The Alliance. Now, interesting thing here is that on YouTube, Episode 11 is titled The Last Parade instead of The Scientist, yet when I was watching the episode, the in-episode credits referred to it still as The Scientist. So if you, just because of that, I'm going to call this episode The Scientist, even though on YouTube it's called The Last Parade, just because the Transformers Wiki and the official in-episode credits call it The Scientist, I'm going to call the episode The Scientist. So we're going to go ahead and see what everything these episodes did right and what they did wrong, starting with Episode 11, The Scientist. Episode 11 starts off, presumably a little bit after that, with Hot Rod, Soundwave, and the rest of the Quintessence Resistance heading back into the Loop Tower to try and break down underground to get to where the Scientist is. Because clearly, even though we never saw the Sarkon General tell them that he's under the Loop Tower, I can assume he must have told them that in between episodes. So as they break their way through the floor of the loop holding area into this other underground laboratory, we see Hot Rod, Soundwave, Dead End, Whirl, Clobber, and Perceptor all making their way down to this big door that it just won't open no matter how hard it tries, until for some reason Soundwave manages to get it open by playing a bird call resembling Laserbeak's. And I gotta say, this episode for some reason decides to give us a Laserbeak origin story as our flashback, because I get it that Laserbeak does play a kind of significant role in this episode, but again, I don't think Laserbeak's role is that significant enough to warrant an origin story in this episode. But thankfully the origin is only 30 seconds long, so I'm not really going to complain about it. Basically, the episode actually started off with this little flashback of before the war for Cybertron, explains how Soundwave came across Laserbeak, which, honestly, we've never actually seen Soundwave use Laserbeak in the entire series before this moment, except for a brief moment back in the Battle for Cybertron arc, where I believe it was either Windblade or RC that fought Laserbeak for a little bit. Anyway, the flashback involves Soundwave finding Laserbeak amongst a flock of other bird bots and uses some sort of lasso gun. Well, first he does a bird call to attract all of them, and then uses a lasso gun to catch Laserbeak and tame him essentially. And I get that it's kind of cute to see how Soundwave came across Laserbeak, considering that Soundwave's origin with Laserbeak is different depending on continuity to continuity, and it is cool to see how Soundwave and Laserbeak came to know each other in the Cyberverse continuity, despite the placement of it being a little odd in my opinion. But anyway, for some reason, after Soundwave does this bird call, it causes the door to open, so he walks in, but Hot Rod tells him to wait. But again, there's still clearly a lot of rivalry between Hot Rod and Soundwave, stemming from the last episode, The Prisoner. So Hot Rod tries to run in after Soundwave and convince him to stop and turn back, but before he can, the door suddenly closes, trapping Hot Rod and Soundwave on one side with the rest of the Autobots and Decepticons on the other. So Dead End, Perceptor, Whirl, and Clobber don't really do a lot of this episode until the very end. So this episode probably focuses more on just Hot Rod and Soundwave. And I gotta say, after The Prisoner, not so much of having a lot of Hot Rod and Soundwave stuff. I mean, we did, but it was kind of weighed down by stuff involving Clobber and Perceptor. So it is cool to see an episode that's focused more entirely on Hot Rod and Soundwave. So once Hot Rod and Soundwave are trapped in the laboratory, they come face to face with the Quintessence Scientist, who easily captures them and basically gives his whole explanation, basically just tells his whole backstory to the two of them. And it's really interesting because I was under the assumption that the judge was in charge, but it seems to be that actually the Quintessence Scientist is in charge if the judge comes from if the judge was in fact created by him, because the scientist explains that he has essentially been going through all these universes, creating different judges for each different universe to judge them. And so when a quintessent judge finds that a universe is guilty, he always takes a souvenir to remember each universe by. And when he sees Soundwave, he reveals that that souvenir is in fact a different Soundwave from each and every single universe that he and the other quintessents have traveled to. And I gotta say, this honestly, the scientist is a really creepy but also funny character, and I gotta say, I really do enjoy his performance. That he just makes, honestly, a lot better than the judge in my opinion. And I hope that even though episode 12 kind of makes it feel like the judge is in control, I really do like the scientist more than the judge, and how maniacal and just creepy he is, that he just kind of sees all the Transformers as toys, essentially, to him. So while Hot Rod and Soundwave are just staring in total shock and horror at all the other sound waves that he's collected, he seems to go and tries to like store Soundwave in there as well. But before he can do that, Soundwave tries to do it like another sound blast. But again, as we saw back in The Prisoner and The Trial, Soundwave glitches out because of the fact that he was improperly removed from the loop. And the scientist actually notices this and decides to go ahead and fix him, which honestly, I was really hoping we get a moment like in Toy Story 2 when the one toy maker comes and fixes Woody, and it's like really aesthetically pleasing, where he pulls out all the different like toy making tools to try and refurbish him. I thought it'd be cool the scientist like just switched all his tendrils and different like equipment tools to try and fix Soundwave, and like just kind of dissecting him and putting him back together. I was really hoping we'd get that, but no, he just kind of like fixes him off screen. And after that, Soundwave uses his little like Soundwave speaker thing, but instead turns into a little turret that presumably kills the scientist. And so when I saw that first, I'm like, wow, really, dude? You're this smart like multiversal being, yet you fix Soundwave not thinking that he would try to kill you? So I thought like I was really gonna hate the fact they took him down so easily. But just before I was about to say that, suddenly another scientist just pops out from the ceiling, and then Hot Rod attacks this one and kills that one, but then another scientist comes down, and so it's every single time it's Soundwave and Hot Rod just killing all these different bodies, but then a new scientist comes to replace him. So apparently the scientist is either like a hive mind, or maybe he's just duplicated his body several dozen times. They maybe like kill him like 5 or 6 times before they finally just stop. And then during this though, I think that's when the scientist realizes that the loop is broken. Soundwave actually manages to free Laserbeak from himself, and Laserbeak manages to steal the source code for the loop, which Laserbeak uses by using the same bird call that Soundwave used back in a few minutes ago to open the door again and let the Laserbeak escape to give the source code to Perceptor. And with that, we actually get everyone freed from the loop while the scientist is still capturing Hot Rod and Soundwave, and that is with Clobber and Perceptor using the source code to break into both the Autobot and Decepticon versions of the loop. And I gotta say, the way they break everyone out of the loop is really funny. So Perceptor starts by going into the Autobot version of the parade, and so essentially he ends up on the float with Optimus. He uses the source code to essentially delete everyone's instruments, and so everyone is fixated on Perceptor now, where he tries to get everyone to transform. But again, no one wants to transform, and it's so irritating to see this happen constantly. But thankfully, though, Perceptor comes up with a better plan, where he just uses the source code to spawn in a bunch of air hammers that we last saw in Season 2, Episode 17, Perfect Storm, that Grimlock and RC directed from destroying the Ark. So all the wind hammers just go and start attacking everyone at the parade, so of course everyone is forced to transform and therefore escape the loop, finally. Meanwhile, though, Clobber isn't having much luck, as she's trying to convince Megatron and everyone in the Decepticon version of the loop to transform, but no one wants to listen to her. So instead, Perceptor just comes into her loop and just does the exact same thing and frees all the Autobots and Decepticons. And it's cool that we get to see, finally, all these characters that we haven't really seen since the beginning of the season, Season 2, like Megatron, Optimus, Bumblebee. All of them finally break out of the loop and are just in total like shock to see what's going on, as Whirl and Dead End cover them and protect them from the drones, while Hot Rod and Soundwave still deal with the scientist. And so while he tries to deal with that, Hot Rod and Soundwave attempt to break free by having Hot Rod and Soundwave do this pretty cool like combo attack where Hot Rod shoots like a gout of flame that's sort of like tunneled in Soundwave's Sound Blast, and doing this, they attack this. I forgot to mention this, that while the scientist is currently in the process of making the Cybertronian version, this universe's version of the Judge that's in this big vat that's right in the middle of the laboratory. So Hot Rod and Soundwave use their attack to essentially, presumably, destroy that, like, test subject Judge. And so while the scientist is trying to save it, Hot Rod and Soundwave escape with all the other Autobots and Decepticons and essentially break out of the loop. And yeah, so it's really cool now we finally have all the Autobots and Decepticons out. But honestly, there's some stuff that I just have a little bit of problems with, especially with the scientist just being a little underwhelming compared to how he made such a big entrance, but he's not that big of a threat, I'd say. I also believe that there was a few moments with, like, why did Soundwave's laser beak call open the scientist's door? I didn't get that either, but there are, like, huge things that make me detract from it. So overall, I'm going to give episode 11, The Scientist, an 8 out of 10. A solid episode, and one I really, really enjoyed. But now we're going to go ahead and move on to episode 12, The Alliance. Now, moving on to episode 12, The Alliance, it's very appropriately named, as this episode focuses on the Autobots and Decepticons now come totally reunited, learning to work together as one, where we just sort of had the little ragtag group of Hot Rod, Soundwave, Dead End, Perceptor, Whirl, and Clobber working together. Now it's all the other Autobots and Decepticons working together, though Hot Rod and Soundwave are still really in charge of the Resistance, which is really cool to see, despite the fact that Optimus and Megatron are now free from the loop. So, essentially, at the end of the last episode, when Hot Rod and Soundwave escaped from the tower, alongside all the other Autobots and Decepticons, a huge force field came around the tower. So now, even though all the Autobots and Decepticons are free from the loop, they do still gotta get rid of the Judge, the Scientist, and the rest of the Quintessence. So to do this, Hot Rod and Soundwave propose that there should be an alliance between both the Autobots and Decepticons, trying to get Optimus and Megatron to finally broker peace. And it seems as though during this big, like, speech where Optimus does seem to be on board with it, again, Megatron is just not interested in it at all, which, really, Megatron? I can understand not wanting to get involved with dealing with Starscream back in Season 2, because he was kind of small potatoes, but literally your whole planet is at stake here. Your livelihood is at stake, and you're just gonna be a little baby, like, little, spoiled brat, and just not want to work with Optimus because, oh, he's the Autobot, Autobot's bad. Like, just grow up, Megatron, for real. But anyway, all the Autobots and Decepticons are just arguing throughout this whole thing. Eventually, Hot Rod tries to get their attention, but no one listens to him, so Soundwave instead just does a huge, like, sound wave over all of them to get their attention, and Hot Rod basically stresses to all the Autobots and Decepticons that they need to learn to work together if they're going to take down the Quintessence. So, we get this really entertaining but also a bit cringy montage with all the Autobots and Decepticons working together. And I say cringy, not that the whole montage was cringy, just one bit about it is cringy. So basically we see like 3 different teams of Autobots and Decepticons working together, where Hot Rod and Soundwave put them all through the training program that he, Whirl, Dead End, and Clobber all went through back, I believe it was episode 8, the Citizen. So they all go through that. So he puts them all together in some really interesting combos. We have Bumblebee and RC teaming up with, I believe, Shadow Striker and Lockdown. We have Grimlock and Cup teaming up with Striker and Dirge. And then we have Jetfire and, I believe, some other Autobots. Jetfire and some other Autobot teaming up with Skybite and Skywarp, I'm pretty sure. And honestly, I love how all these Autobots and Decepticons just play off each other. But the one thing I have a problem with here is, first off, when Bumblebee goes into the training thing with Shadow Striker, RC, and Lockdown, he doesn't acknowledge the fact that Hot Rod's just alive at all. Because as we saw throughout all of Season 2, and even the first 4 episodes of Season 3, Bumblebee's and Hot Rod's relationship was so close to the point where I'm just keep saying it, that literally Hot Rod and Bumblebee were brothers in that sense. And so you saw just how devastated Bumblebee was when he believed Hot Rod died back in Battle for Cybertron Part 3. So the fact that he just doesn't seem to mention at all, like there's even no like tearful reunion where he's just so happy to see Hot Rod's actually alive, or like make a remark of how proud he is to see him become like a real leader. There's no reference at all. Bumblebee just maybe like says one word to Hot Rod, but no acknowledgement of the fact that he saw him die like dozens of, or maybe hundreds of years ago. I guess you could assume this happened off screen, but the fact that that was such a big moment for Bumblebee back in the episode 3, and that they just skim over it, that just hurts me a lot in my opinion, and really puts a downer on this. Because that was a moment I was really hoping to see this season, and the fact that we don't really bothers me. The second thing that bothers me here is when they go into the training simulation, Hot Rod makes like a nice little Transformers reference where he states that he hopes all the Autobots and Decepticons have the touch, and they cue Soundwave to play this really, really horrible generic rock music, and I was really confused by this until I read a Q&A done by May Cat, who was one of the head writers on Cyberverse, where she stated that originally the plan was to get the Cyberverse team to actually get the rights to the actual song The Touch and play that during the scene. And if that happens, this would make a lot more sense, but the fact that they go with just this really cringy, upbeat 80s like rock song that's really trying hard to be The Touch but just isn't, it just really makes this whole scene a bit too cringy in my opinion. And it doesn't totally ruin the scene, but it just makes it feel awkward. Like, if they couldn't get the rights to the Touch song, just take out the reference as a whole. Otherwise, it just feels really forced and just really odd in my opinion. But despite that, though, the montage overall is really funny. Like, we see different points where, at the start, all the Autobots and Decepticons just can't get along as they fight the drones, which now resemble the Quintesson drones instead of the alien bug things that McAdam fought in the beginning of the Episode 8 flashback. So, like, we see this one point where Grimlock and Strika are arguing and fighting each other over who gets to use this big sledgehammer. One of my favorite moments, though, is when RC Lockdown, Bumblebee, and Shadow Striker are fighting their group of drones, and Shadow Striker is literally using Bumblebee as a human shield while one of the drones just keeps headbutting into Bumblebee. And at first I feel so bad for Bumblebee in this scene, but I also really find it funny just how Shadow Striker is just she picks up Bumblebee and uses him as a human shield against the drones. And it's eventually though, the Autobots and Decepticons do learn to work together, and we get some really nice moments here that will come into play later on. Like, I especially love the dynamic between Bumblebee and Shadow Striker. I've always said this all the way back in Season 1, where, especially in Shadow Striker's debut episode, which was called Shadow Striker, I really, really loved, like, how Bumblebee and Shadow Striker were essentially polar opposites of each other. And to see them now come together under sort of a mutual partnership or become allies, like tenacious allies to a degree, I really do like how their relationship has grown over these past 3 seasons, especially considering we had that big final fight between the two of them at the end of Season 1, which I was a really big fan of. So it's really cool to see their relationship grow as this episode goes on. The training basically continues until all the Autobots and Decepticons are finally, like, working together properly and so then Windblade eventually comes, though, to Hot Rod and Soundwave, who are just watching all the groups of Autobots and Decepticons train together, and she asks them if, like, they're gonna make her train as well, but Hot Rod states that they have another plan for her. As we saw back in episode 9, the trial, clearly, Hot Rod wants to use Windblade to awaken Iaconus in hopes that it will help them defeat the Quintessons. And yet, again, this is really weird considering that McAdam barely does anything to try and stop them until, like, they're halfway through the process. Though, so why, like, if McAdam is so adamant about them not waking Iaconus, why doesn't he do more to try and stop them? So, while Windblade approaches Iaconus, she does attempt to merge with him, but it becomes so overwhelming she gets knocked back, and at this point, McAdam comes in, basically, again, warning Hot Rod, Soundwave, and Windblade not to awaken Iaconus, and saying that he'll do too much, he'll do more damage than good, and that he's not like a normal Titan. So, Hot Rod just decides to presumably give up on the plan of Iaconus, saying that instead they're going to try a different plan to take down the Quintesson Tower. And that's with a bunch of Cybertronian old warheads that they found inside Iaconus. So Optimus, carrying one of these warheads, leads Hot Rod, RC, and everyone else into this battle. And I gotta say, this battle with the Quintessons against all the Autobots and Decepticons is really, really cool. It's another great example of just how much better Boulder Media has gotten at doing these large-scale battles. So it starts off with Optimus and the rest of the Resistance Force coming into contact with the leader of the Sharkticons for the Quintessons, named Lord Gnaw, who I think had a nice little had a brief mention back in Wiped Out, but it's the first time we're seeing him. And Lord Gnaw, unlike the rest of Sharkticons, is no pushover. He has all the Sharkticons and Quintessons drones come in to attack, and we get some really cool team-up shots throughout this whole episode. We do see the points where RC and Lockdown are battling a bunch of drones. They're both armed with, like, different, like, Gatling guns, shooting out all the Quintesson drones out of the sky. This really cool point where Bumblebee and Shadow Striker are surrounded by Sharkticons, and Shadow Striker transforms with Bumblebee jumping on top of her, and while Shadow Striker peels out in a circle, Bumblebee shoots out all of them. And I love these, like, I just love all of these these team-ups. I always have been a fan of these, especially back in Battle for Cybertron parts 2 through 4, where we saw it a lot, especially this one cool scene where even Jetfire is being attacked by a bunch of drones, and it looks like one's gonna get him when Skybite manages to bite down on it and throw it away from him. And it's cool, again, it's cool to see just all these characters we've seen that have had such a rivalry or animosity between each other eventually finally become allies, and I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. But eventually, though, it seems like despite their best efforts, the battle is slowly turning in the Sharkticon's favor, as when Windblade goes to battle Lord Gnaw just yeets Windblade, easily overpowering her, biting down her, and tossing her into like a building. And so when Windblade sees all the Transformers being taken down by the Sharkticons and Quintessence, one of the Sharkticons ends up detonating the warhead that Optimus and the rest of the Transformers plan to use to break through the Quintessent force field and destroy the tower. So that plan is a fail. So when Windblade activates, I forgot that's the reason why Windblade activates Ioconus, not just because all the Sharkticons overpower the Autobots. It's because they set off the warhead first and then try to capture all the Autobots and Decepticons. So Windblade's in the process of activating Ioconus, and he gets to the point where Ioconus manages to get an arm free out of Cybertron, when all of a sudden McAdam comes out of nowhere and just snatches Windblade out from in front of Ioconus, stopping the transformation, the awakening midway, saying that several speakers had died trying to awaken Ioconus. And that's just how the episode ends, that all the Autobots and Decepticons retreat, while McAdam just cradles Windblade as, like, Ioconus' hand just stays sticking out of the arc, and not the arc, of Cybertron. And so where we go from here, I'm not exactly sure, but it was an entertaining episode. And so that was my review of Transformers Cyberverse Season 3, Episode 12, The Alliance. If I had to rate this episode, I would give it probably a 7.5 out of 10. It's still a good episode, don't get me wrong, but there's just so many things wrong in this episode that I can't ignore it. Like Bumblebee's reunion with Hot Rod, he doesn't acknowledge him at all, despite the fact that they're literally brothers, and he was heartbroken over his supposed death back in Episode 4, or Episode 3, and the fact that he doesn't mention it at all is super disappointing. And the fact that the touch montage, that's the fact that they didn't get the rights to touch and instead went with that really cheesy rip-off song of the touch, it just makes the montage that's pretty funny just a bit too cringy to actually enjoy completely, in my opinion. And both those parts, as well as just a little stuff with McAdam not doing so much to prevent Windblade, Hot Rod, and Soundwave from awakening Ioconus, just, if you're that concerned about Ioconus not awakening, why don't you try harder, man? Those things I just can't ignore, so that's why it's a little bit lower. But that's going to be it for these reviews. I'll be back soon with Episode 13, The Judge, and it will be just that episode because it was only released, the only episode released during that day, but then we'll be coming back with a 4-episode review after that, so I hope you'll stay tuned for that. But for now, the next review will just be Episode 13, The Judge. If you're excited for the next review and can't wait to see me do what's next, be sure to like, comment, and of course subscribe. And I will see you guys later. Take it away, Bumblebee.
Bumblebee out.
And I might know